RT is sitting down with radio and TV host, author, journalist, columnist Amy Goodman. Amy, thank you very much for sitting down with us today.
It's great to be with you.
You represent the voice of the alternative media in the United States. Do you feel that the Americans are hearing this voice? And if not, do you see them still leaning towards the mainstream?
Independent media is growing all over the country, and it's absolutely critical because we are dealing with global crises, global warring, global warming, the global economic meltdown, the lack of health care in the United States. And we need a media that is independent of the forces that benefit, for example, from private health care in the United States, the advertisement-driven media. And that's where independent media comes in. Public media, media that's supported by listeners and viewers, and not by the corporations that profit from war, especially when we're covering issues of war, from Iraq to Afghanistan.
How much of the American media is independent?
I would say there's a growing independent media movement in the United States. Democracy Now!, my broadcast on radio and television, we're on 800 stations. Some are small, some are very large. But then you have the networks that are across the country that are run by corporations, unfortunately, that profit from war. And now in the United States, there's public television, there's public access TV in every community where people can make their own media. And it's so important that these places be supported because, well, for example, we see what the media did in the lead up to the invasion of Iraq. Those who are opposed to war, those who are opposed to torture, are not a fringe minority, not even a silent majority, but the silenced majority, silenced by the corporate media, which is why we have to take it back. Someone asked me the other day what I think of the mainstream media. I think it would be a good idea. They're not representing the mainstream.
What voices exactly are underrepresented by the mainstream media?
Let me count all the voices. I mean, what is interesting is that it's a minority elite who is represented in the media. I'm not talking about people of color. A small elite. What we get in the networks of the United States is this small circle of pundits who know so little about so much, explaining the world to us and getting it so wrong. And Afghanistan is key right now because here you have a new administration, President Obama, and he is expanding the war in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And where is the opposition in the mainstream media in the United States?
So who should the American people trust? Who should they turn to for the truth? What sources of information?
First and foremost, a diversity of information. Radio, television, internet, newspapers, books. They seem to be dying out, yet so important to understand the richness, the history, the culture, people from different places, from different generations, different centuries. And independent is what's important, looking at who owns the media. In the United States, the corporate media is owned by a handful of corporations. So you'll see hundreds of cable channels, but very often they're all owned by the same corporations. You know, I also often talk about a free media, but I think it's very important to talk about freeing the media.
Do you think there's a war going on between the alternative and the mainstream media?
I think we're a challenge to the corporate media. People are demanding of the corporate media they should open up. I see the independent media as a huge kitchen table that stretches across the globe, that we all sit around and debate and discuss the most important issues of the day, war and peace, life and death. And anything less than that is a disservice to a democratic society. I think the corporate media is influenced by independent media, and especially with the internet, so many people turning to the internet. They no longer can be the gatekeepers of all information, just protecting the status quo.
Let's focus on Afghanistan, relocating more troops and efforts there. What is your position? Is this a good idea or a bad idea?
Well, I think the key here is that the media has to provide a forum for a robust debate about this issue. I was flying from Dearborn, Michigan recently, and I happened to sit next to a military consultant who was headed to the military town of Huntsville, Alabama. And we were talking about the economy, and then I said, well, you must be doing very well because the war is expanding. He said, yes, we are. And I said, and how do you feel about that? He said, I'm puzzled, I'm baffled. because I'm an American. And I said, yes. And he said, well, I don't understand why we're expanding the war in Afghanistan. I said, but you're making money. He said, yes, we are. And I said, are other military contractors, consultants, people in the Pentagon that you party with, talk to, are they saying the same thing? He said, yes. Then where are those voices?
Do you think it's normal for the U.S. government to be injecting billions of dollars into its defense budget when millions of people are going through an extremely hard time?
Well, this is the critical issue right now. I mean, we are going through a massive global crisis. Unemployment is soaring, and it's far higher than what people talk about, especially in minority communities. And yet, we're pouring money into the war machine. Wall Street is being bailed out to the tune of, well, over $1 trillion ultimately. And who is it done on the backs of? The poorest people in the United States.
Covering the work of the new administration, President Barack Obama, do you think the mainstream media is doing a decent job in telling the American people everything they need to know?
The media has reached an all-time low, every which way. I mean, I think the embedding process has helped bring it there. You know what I mean? Reporters embedded in the front lines of troops in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. You know, what do you get from that perspective? You are sleeping with the troops, eating with the troops. Your life is in their hands. I'm not saying these journalists aren't brave, but you're looking at the conflict from the trigger end of the gun. And the problem isn't only embedding in the front lines of troops, it's also embedding in the establishment in Washington. I mean, you see these reporters at the White House press conferences all too often enjoying what I call the access of evil. That's trading truth for access. And that's unacceptable. Politicians need journalists far more than journalists need politicians.
You were arrested last summer at the Republican National Convention. What does that tell you about the state of democracy and the freedom of press?
Oh, it wasn't only me, and it's a very serious issue. Rather than just talking about a free media, we now have to talk about freeing the media. There were more than 40 journalists who were arrested in St. Paul covering the Republican convention. Our coverage was called Breaking with Convention, War, Peace, and the Presidency, from the streets to the suites to the convention floor. You know, the story is not just the orchestrated message on the convention floor of either the Democrats or the Republicans. You got to get out there on the streets. Democracy is a messy thing, and we're supposed to cover it all. They twisted my arms back, slapped my hands with the rigid handcuffs, pushed me up against the wall and then onto the ground. Within seconds, I was arrested. And I was saying to the police, you see, we are reporters, this is unacceptable. Whereupon the Secret Service came and ripped the credentials from around our necks. I was taken to the police garage where the protest cages were set up. But the YouTube video of our arrests went viral. It was the most watched video on YouTube for the first 2 days of the convention. That's what freed us. Thousands of people were writing and calling and faxing and tweeting, doing everything to get us out, and that freed us.
Why do you think this kind of thing is going on in the United States, the beacon of democracy?
We always have to be very vigilant, and that's what the press is. No, it's absolutely critical that we be able to function. In this high-tech digital age with high-definition television and digital radio, still all we ever get is ever more static. That veil of distortion and lies and misrepresentations and half-truths that obscure reality. When what we need is the media to give us the dictionary definition of static. That's criticism, opposition, unwanted interference. We need a media that covers power, not covers for power. We need a media that is the fourth estate, not for the state. And we need a media that covers the movements that create static and make history.
Is America seeing more transparency from the new presidential administration than from the previous one?
What we're seeing is a closing down of information, and that's frightening. The trend is going the other way. And we've come out of years of a secret government, of a government that's really tried to keep secrets so much. For years, people have felt that they've been hitting their head against a brick wall. And now that wall is a door, and the doors open a crack. And the question is whether it will be kicked open or slammed shut. That's the issue now.
Reports of the Bush administration setting up an assassination ring that reported to Dick Cheney. What does that tell us? Do you think the new administration has moved away from these kinds of policies?
This is so serious. What have we come to represent in the rest of the world? I think most Americans don't realize this because the media doesn't talk about it very much. President Obama's approach is to say we have to look forward, not look back. That is very dangerous. It's an interesting idea about criminal justice in America. Do you open all the prisons? Do you abolish prisons? Let's look forward, not look back.
Amy Goodman, thank you very much for your time with us today.
Thank you.